Welcome everybody to another video by Newsbits. Today I want to work with you guys to help me draw some conclusions because at this point I don't have too many conclusions other than what I'm going to show you today, and that's really to the question of who wants war with Iran. Because as an American citizen, both my civilian and active military friends do not want war from what conversations I'm having. We're going to look into some pieces of information and then hopefully work together to come up with some conclusions. Right now, so we have a little bit of a page by the American Friends Service Committee saying no war with Iran. So essentially, the main takeaway here is this group and many other organizations support legislation that would have reasserted Congress's war powers, their authority to stop military actions by the executive branch. So Congress must take action to ensure that no president is ever able to unilaterally move us into war. And when I say us, I mean the United States, because that's where I'm from, and to stop endless wars by strengthening and using congressional war powers. So right now, to answer the question, who wants war with Iran, it does not look like the American Friends Service Committee does. Further going into that question, it looks like in January 30th of 2020, so about a year ago, the House votes no war against Iran in rebuke to Trump. So at this point, it looks like the Democratic side of the House didn't want war with Iran. And so I'm starting to pick up a little bit of a trend. Right here, our soldiers deserve dignity of debate whether they should go to war. So, none of these unilateral drone strikes by the president, that's wrong both on the Democratic and the Republican side. So we're going to segue into some strikes that happened in Syria, working to confront Iran's militant network. So the subtitle here, you can kind of hear some bias. Using a carefully calibrated approach, the president hopes to restrain Iran's regional militia allies without undercutting efforts to reach a new nuclear deal. So what's going on here? There's a big deal right here. America is unhappy with how Iran is handling their nuclear capabilities. And we're going to see Reuters come out with an article that Iran dismisses the idea of talks with the EU and US to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. Really, the nuclear deal that we're talking about is a piece of it, but is the non-proliferation treaty. We're going to get into that in a little bit, but we're going to look at who's actually participating in these nuclear deals and who's not, because it's going to be important for the sake of this conversation and drawing some conclusions. I looked at some C-SPAN footage, the Defense Department briefing for today. Nothing too interesting. If you're interested in the drone strikes in Syria, they started about 1643. The two main questions that are asked are, do we know the nationality of the individual that died in the drone strike? And the answer is no. And really not too many interesting kind of takeaways so far in this briefing. But I encourage you to look at other C-SPAN footage because this is only March 1st and it's 3 days past the drone strike. So, all right. So now to further look into the question of who wants war with Iran, we're going to look at a Pew Research kind of study, and I'm terrible at his name, but Soleimani. Before Soleimani's death, concerns about Iran had fallen in many countries, including the U.S. So let's look at how concerned America was with Iran being the biggest threat. So before Soleimani's death, concerns about Iran as a threat had fallen in many countries, including the U.S. So the percentage who say Iran is the country or group that poses the greatest threat to our country in the future. In the United States, it got down to 6%. So only 6% thought Iran was a true threat at the end of, looks like 2019, according to this. So now you want to ask, who does see Iran as a threat? And we're actually going to keep scrolling down in this study to find who has, seen or identified Iran as a threat. And right here, we're going to look at Israelis most likely to name Iran as a top threat in the country. So the percent in this country who name Iran as the country or group that poses the greatest threat to their country is overwhelmingly Israel. You look, it's about 10 times greater in Israel than it is in the U.S. And now that's starting to paint a picture for me of who wants war with Iran. Because I can tell you as a taxpayer in America, I want my money to start going to things. I've had plenty of friends, affected by opiates. I've had plenty of friends that are having trouble, on their path to ownership and owning a house. There are so many things that I want to, invest in from our own nation that I am super against, funding these wars, these forever wars in the Middle East. So right here we see who wants war most with Iran. And now let's look at a funny article coming out from the Times of Israel. This came out 26th, right the day after the drone strikes, and the headline says it all. Israel said very pleased with U.S. strikes in Syria. Biden is not Obama. Even though Obama did a lot of drone strikes himself, they all do, all these presidents. And I am not a partisan hack. I actually don't, align with either of these parties. I think it's a dichotomy created to divide. But I just think it's interesting that Israel is very pleased with these strikes. It's starting to look like we're actually not fighting our war. But I don't want to, fully draw the conclusion until you guys can comment a little bit. But one of the big deals that these people are making is that Iran dismisses the idea of talks with the U.S. about a nuclear deal. What's very interesting to me is we can look at the Treaty on Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and we can see who's not signing it. So we can look at the treaty structure, we can look at key articles, history, but what we want to look at is non-signatories, or people that have not signed it. And so far, 4 countries have never signed the treaty. And let's look at the 4 countries: India, Israel, Pakistan, and South Sudan. So what's most interesting to me, and there's some content here on Iran, how they were in non-compliance with NPT in 2003, and that's where we're working on to renegotiate with them. But I think it's wicked funny that Israel is a country that has not signed the NPT, yet they're encouraging us to go to war over many things like Iran's non-compliance with the nuclear deal, and other things. So anyway, this was supposed to be a short video. It looks like it was 7 minutes. I want you guys to help me draw a conclusion, because I am truly misunderstood potentially, or just ignorant to the fact of why the U.S. wants to go to war with Iran. All right, thank you guys for joining, and have a great night.